everyone, welcome to another Classic Movie Monday, and today I'm going to be diving into another Disney film, in particular an older Disney film that came out. And as you can see by the title as well as the thumbnail, we're going to be discussing Ichabod and Mr. Toad. The interesting and unique thing about this particular film is that it's basically two stories within one, which is usually something that you don't see out of Disney fairly often, especially within its later years. Obviously, in the earlier days, within the 40s and 50s, they were doing experimenting as far as animation is concerned, and Fantasia being one of the really big experiments as far as pushing the envelope when it comes to animation and seeing what animation is capable of doing. And as far as these kinds of experiments go, I think Ichabod and Mr. Toad remains to be one of the more successful ones, I think on a critical level as well as audience level. And I think a lot of people still remember this short or are fairly familiar with these two short stories in particular that are basically woven into one film. So without further ado, let me sort of address what this particular Disney film was kind of going for. Now, what I mean by the two stories is basically they're taking the traditional Disney formula of usually revolving it around a original source material, and in doing so, instead of it just being one story that they focus on, like the majority of their films are, it focuses on two stories. In particular, the Headless Horseman tale, which we are all really familiar with, I'm sure, and Mr. Toad, which is another somewhat famous tale involving a toad. Although I don't think a lot of people are as familiar within the States when it comes to that particular story compared to the adventures of Ichabod Crane, basically, because obviously location and as far as time period is concerned, I don't think in particular the Toad story transferred all that much over into the States, but regardless, these two stories are rather interesting in how Disney tries to take it, because Disney basically just takes these stories and makes them their own unique thing out of it. And basically we start off with Mr. Toad's story really being the first story. I find it funny how they call it Ichabod and Mr. Toad, even though it's in the reverse order as far as how the stories appear within the film. But basically, the Mr. Toad story revolves around this toad, and he is sort of driven mad by things that are fairly popular or have some kind of pizzazz to them, so to speak, and he, unfortunately, as a result of his sort of madness, as they call it, he ultimately gets accused of a crime, which he actually did not commit, but you'll see how all these other characters end up coming into play and ultimately try to help Mr. Toad out. But really, that's the essence of the story, and the way Disney tells the story is actually rather unique and interesting and somewhat different from what we see with a lot of the other films that they've done over the years. Is that they try to be a little bit more comedic here. There's a lot of little genuine funny moments that end up happening within this particular part of the film, and it's very enjoyable to watch and engaging, and the characters are memorable, and you can kind of somewhat identify, I think, with the the toad just wanting to jump on the bandwagon of something just because he finds the one thing that he's obsessed with so interesting. Um, but there is a lot of just little oddities that end up occurring that make it feel like a Disney product, but at the same time trying to take its ideas and put an interesting spin on the original tale, while at the same time kind of offering something different as far as animation is concerned, and trying to be a little bit more comedic and lighthearted with its subject matter. Even though it does have somewhat suspenseful and dark moments to it as well. And that's something I think that Disney just does so well of. They offer a variety of emotions within their films. They don't try to go for one specifically. And this short is just well paced and well executed as far as from an animation standpoint, and it's fairly memorable, and even Disneyland has a ride dedicated to Mr. Toad. So I think it only makes sense that this is the one short in particular that a lot of people remember, that ultimately ended up becoming this film, where we have two short stories. But yeah, that's really the first act really of the film, is just that one story. And then it shifts gears to the Headless Horseman story involving Ichabod Crane. And I would say that, like I mentioned in a video that I did a way while back, where I actually compared and contrast the original source material with the Disney versions of these two short films that are basically woven into one film. Again, Disney puts its own unique spin on it, but at the same time, they also offer something rather unique. And in particular, what I like about the Ichabod short is I like that it is all done for the most part through emotional expression. There's no dialogue throughout this short. You just let the expressions and the way everybody sort of interacts with each other on a visual level kind of have that be your means of understanding what's going on. And they do a really excellent job of showcasing the story without having so much dialogue to it. And although there's a narrator it doesn't really end up being so intrusive onto the story. And I would say that as far as a short in particular about this kind of subject matter, again, you have your funny comedic moments, and then you have your dark, intense, and suspenseful moments in it as well. But basically, the short pretty much goes with the flow of the original source material, in that you have this guy named Ichabod Crane who ends up stumbling upon this town, and eventually becomes a target for the Headless Horseman. And you'll also see too how Ichabod is not the most, I guess you could say, admirable protagonist, considering the fact that he just wants to kind of jump on the bandwagon of this rich farmer's daughter and sort of take his money. So yeah, when you really look at it from that standpoint, I don't think Disney was trying to, though, really essentially make this protagonist or this character that we focus on in particular someone that we should admire, but someone that we should kind of I guess, just be amused by, because there are a lot of funny things that end up occurring within the short that involve Ichabod, sort of interacting with those that are around him. Um, and I think that really ultimately is what makes the short stand out, and why there are these very genuinely funny moments, and then there's also these really dark, intense moments too. And I think there was a lot of inspiration that people got from this particular short because um, it is one of those shorts that knows how to bring out the cool factor when the one thing that's supposed to be cool about this short comes up, which obviously in this case is the headless horseman. So and I think again a lot of people got inspiration about the animation and just the way everything flows. I think overall this was a very well done uh, short, and in doing so we have basically a full length film, or at least I would say it's roughly over an hour, I'd say. Uh, it's obviously not as long as some other Disney films that have come out. Um, but regardless, it was the one film where I think attempting this more kind of short story format ultimately worked to Disney's advantage, because I think when you look at a lot of the other products that they did at the time that were trying to do sort of what Ichabod and Mr. Toad did do, um, they didn't carry as much weight or as much thought or creativity behind them. And I think that's why this one in particular is one that stands out to a lot of people, and why they enjoy it, I think, the most out of this kind of out of all the ones that try to do this kind of format. And again, although Fantasia was a very experimental product, and obviously it succeeded in many ways, this one succeeds in a different way because um, obviously Fantasia was going for something different by, again, not really having dialogue or having so much of an emphasis on story. The other ones, uh, like I believe Fun and Fancy Free and um, uh, the Three Amigos, I believe. Um, although those attempts were, I think, well executed, this one in particular seemed to be one where Disney kind of knew how to it knew how to make everything flow, I think, well. Whereas they're kind of, and again, was, I think, obviously a later project compared to the other ones that were sort of similar to this kind of a format. So they obviously probably took the cues from what they've learned from their previous um, kinds of work that did involve this kind of format and make it sort of their own thing. Um, so and in doing so make it an improvement, I would say, from those previous attempts. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film. It's pretty straightforward in just having these two short stories and having a lot of interesting and crazy oddities. And in doing so, it's a really fun adventure. Or adventurers, I guess you could say, because you're getting two for the price of one. But yeah, I think that's really, though, everything I can say. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.